Welcome to Chapter 7. Let's see what we can do here. We're going to talk about interpersonal relationships. More about the communication itself than the actual relationships. That's going to come up in another chapter. All right, so let's move on. Let's look at what the definition of interpersonal is. The book defines interpersonal communication as involving interaction between people who are part of a close and irreplaceable relationship, which they treat each other as unique individuals. What I find really funny about this is that previously in the book, it defines interpersonal versus intrapersonal. Intra being self, inter being between two people. And it does so in such a way as saying, it's that the specific definition is dyadic, but also that it is anything between two people. Now we're being more specific and saying that for this purpose, interpersonal is talking about specifically relationships. So saying hi or speaking to a cashier at a grocery store isn't necessarily interpersonal according to this definition. It's something where it's more in depth. And for this purpose, we can run with this, and we're fine with that. All right, now moving on, we're going to talk about metacommunication. Metacommunication is the idea of talking about talking, or talking about communicating specifically. So it's that sitting down and having a conversation. It's communication about communication. So when you're fighting, it isn't always that you're fighting necessarily about the bagel that somebody ate the last of, but it could be something underlying, that part underneath that seems to run. And so talking about your problems, not only the specifics of you ate the last piece of pizza, but the whole idea of you don't take my feelings into consideration. Does that make sense? So when you get into it, you start looking at the idea of metacommunication, and then that's that talking about talking. And yes, females are more inclined to talk more about this than necessarily males. But it is the idea, that's that feminine communication style. I am one that likes metacommunication, like I talked about before. So now, when we think about this, we are thinking about having those conversations. Now, one of the issues is that there is such a thing as too much communication. And the idea of drilling down and working about the relationship and digging into this relationship or digging into the specifics of all these things can oftentimes cause more problems than it actually solves. Now, when we're talking about talking and we're talking about that, let's talk about self-disclosure. There are two things we're going to talk about. The first one is social penetration model. It's the idea of depth and breadth. When you first meet someone, when you first start talking to someone, you do this. It's that whole breadth. It's that width, that area in which you have a whole lot of information, just with little shallow bits. It's surface. It's just scratching the surface. We're going to talk about the weather. We're going to talk about school. We're going to talk about that. We're not going to really get in depth. Now, as your communication grows and as your self-disclosure goes, because assuming that it's a reciprocal thing, and we're going to talk about those specifics later, but assuming that you and I are talking and we are both disclosing about ourselves, then we're going to start talking more in depth, and we're going to talk about deeper subjects. We're going to go more detailed about what we want to see in the world, those lives, how our life should go, the things that we want to do, becoming more and more, or becoming closer and closer. So we go from this really broad span of a lot of subjects down to a very narrow little bit of subjects, but really in depth about those subjects. It's kind of the idea of like this vortex that's down here. This is the breadth, and then we're really going to get into the depth of things. All right. Now, it's also got there's another thing talks about self-disclosure, and that's the Johari Window. Johari Window is the idea of information and understanding what information everybody knows about what. So those are those things, and as you can see this nice little square here, so those things that we find that we know about ourselves, and other people know about us, are open. Those are things that's open, that's allowed to be there, that we all know. Now there's stuff that we know about ourselves that we don't share. We know that. There's a lot of things we don't share. That bit of information is hidden. We know it, they don't know it. Now, then there's stuff that is not known to you, things that you don't know, yet other people do. This is the area in which it is blind. And the idea that people can know about you that you don't know about you, kind of, there's some people taken aback by it. But I like to pick on my nephew on this one. When he came out of the closet, he's gay. When he came out and he goes, guess what? I'm gay. We're all like, duh, we've known this for years. We knew about it. We knew that he was gay before he knew he was gay. He probably had feelings, sense, or whatever, but he didn't know for certain. Now, there are things that neither you nor I know about each other, and those are things that are unknown. Those are bits and pieces that we don't know. So when you're looking at information, you're looking at information that's known, that's open, that everybody knows about. That's really not disclosure, but releasing things that you know about yourself that others know, that's self-disclosure. Other people telling you about stuff is disclosure of information that we know about you. And of course, then you got the stuff over in the corner that nobody knows about anybody. So obviously it's unknown. All right, moving on. Let's look at some other questions you should consider before you actually start disclosing. The first question is the other person important to you? Do you find that person to be of importance enough to release this information to? Okay. Now, the next thing is it appropriate? Am I telling something that makes sense? Not only is this person important to me, but is it the disclosure appropriate to this relationship? Obviously, if you're on a second date, they're important to you, but maybe you shouldn't disclose that you were a bedwetter till you were 5 or 15 or whatever age you were. So think about that. What is appropriate? Is it appropriate or not? The next one is it reasonable? Is the risk of disclosure reasonable? By me telling you something about myself, by me disclosing this information, is the risk reasonable? You got to look and think of the risk reward idea. I'm going to tell you something. It's going to obviously theoretically is appropriate. It's something I want you to know about me. Is it reasonable that what you know that you're either going to keep it secret, or I'm not concerned that you're going to release it if you do? So think about the reasonability of it. And then let's go on to, is the amount and type of disclosure appropriate? So not only is disclosure itself appropriate, should I tell you, but also is what I'm saying and how much I'm telling you, does that work? Is that an appropriate level? Should that make sense? Should I do this? Does that make sense? And the next one, is it relevant to the situation? Am I telling you something about, let's go back to I am on our third date now, and I'm going to tell you that, I don't know. Honestly, I can't think of anything offhand. But let's say, is it relevant to the situation? Is this something you need to know about me? Is this something that matters in this situation now? Or should this something be done later, or maybe not at all? So when you're thinking, remember, think through these things. You should be asking yourself these questions. And then, is it reciprocated? For those of you who don't know what reciprocated is give and take. It's that back and forth. If you think about your best friend, and they know a lot about you, right? Your best friend knows all this stuff about you. So my question is, do you know a lot of things about your best friend? Probably. So in the Cold War, what would happen is that the Russians were building up nukes. The U.S. was building up nukes. We all did this. It was this thing called MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. We knew that if we fired off our nuclear missiles, the Russians would fire off, we all die. So when you stop and think about self-disclosure and whether it's reciprocated, if I am telling you things and you're telling me things and I know all your little secrets and they know all my little secrets, I'm not going to tell your secrets for fear of losing my secrets. So is it reciprocated? Yes, that's a big question. Is this a one-sided relationship? Are we only talking, am I the only one doing the disclosure? The next one, is it constructive? Is it going to be helpful? Okay, so let's say I've made it through this list and everything is useful, but is it actually going to be helpful to the situation? Is it going to be meh, does it matter? Or is it something that's actually useful that we should be telling people? And then the next, last but not least, is it understood? Can you understand it? Am I saying something that is like so obscure or so out there that it makes no sense to why I'm actually releasing it or what I'm actually saying? So think about that. When you look back and you get ready to tell your dirty little secrets to whomever, whether it be on Facebook or wherever, think about all these things. Is this stuff important? Is it appropriate? Is it reasonable? Is the risk going to be there? Am I getting it? Is it tit for tat? Am I getting more information from them? And then is it clear and understandable? All right. This was a very short chapter in the bits and pieces that I felt really important about for you all. We've got much more coming up in the next 2 chapters. So check out chapter 7, look in the other bits and pieces, make sure that you're aware of all these things, because if it's in the book, it's potentially on the test. And we'll move on to the next chapter here next week.